I mean, Lenny, please do stay if you'd like for the next part, which is we're going to talk to Dr. Farrin. So from a perspective of psychiatry and how we work together to help ADHDers redesign their lives around ADHD, basically, so they can hopefully thrive. But yeah.
Yeah, I'll stay for a few minutes and then drop off, but happy to be here. Thank you.
Okay. Dr. Farrin, welcome. Thank you so much for coming.
Hi, good evening. Thanks for inviting me.
It's great to see you. It's been a long time, actually, since I've seen you.
It's been a long time. Yeah, busy lives.
Yeah. How have you got the one child now or two? You've got
Yeah, one child.
Yeah. How old is your child now?
He's 3 years old.
Oh my gosh, already.
Yeah.
That's crazy.
Nice. Yeah.
It really does. But no, welcome. So yeah, I thought today it would be great for people to just listen to your perspective as a psychiatrist around definitely the challenges that you're seeing. What are these young people with ADHD bringing to you? Why are they, what are they suffering at the moment? And then I guess we can talk about what you do with them that helps them, and then how you work with ADHD coaches and what you've seen in terms of the benefits. So firstly, I'll let you start with kind of sharing what you're seeing with these young people struggling.
Yeah, absolutely. So let me tell you a bit about my background, because I think it's interesting. So I'm originally I was an adult psychiatrist, and then I became a child psychiatrist and became more interested in ADHD back in 2002. And that is when I did a training with who I think is one of the most talented and incredible, is a professor in child psychiatry who's now retired. Is Professor Eric Taylor, and he's well known because of his work in ADHD. And it's how I became more familiar with ADHD and all its phases and shapes. And then, so that was back in 2004, and it's been 20 years now, and believe it or not. And so one of the things that I have reflected a lot is how things have changed since I first started assessing and treating ADHD back in 2004. And then we can discuss this later on in depth, but it's kind of really amazing how everything has changed. I remember back on those days, only boys were diagnosed with ADHD. We didn't have girls, and it was pretty much the standard type of person who was kind of perfectly meeting all the DSM-4 criteria. Back on those days, we couldn't have ADHD and autism at the same time. And it was very, very challenging, because I found myself like, well, this child has autism and ADHD. But the system is not allowing me to diagnose both. So that was 20 years ago. And now we are experiencing kind of a different presentations, I think.
You've got ADHD now too. It's so, widely accepted. You can have both. They've got a name for it.
Finally. And then, but I think we are experiencing many challenges. For instance, I think one of the main ones is how to diagnose ADHD in girls, and how the criteria should be more adaptable or more reflecting symptoms in girls. Okay, so there's a lot like going on in here, but yeah, that's a little bit of my background. So I also, since 2004 approximately, I've been doing research in ADHD, and I've joined the European ADHD Guidelines Group. So I've been doing multiple meta-analysis studies with the European ADHD Guidelines Group, which is also, I think, good for my personal and professional background. And I work for the NHS in Haringey, and I work privately as well. So I do a little bit of both, because I think, and we can also discuss this later on, I think kids that come to the NHS sometimes, because of the obviously humongous lengthy wait lists, they sometimes, by the time they arrive, they come to us with many added problems, and then sometimes the clients and the young people coming to the private sector are slightly better, because they haven't waited for so long, right? And yeah, throughout my life, I've been trying to emphasize that medication is not the only answer, because I don't really like either professionals or parents who are kind of almost relying on the medication for almost like, I don't know, every type of behavior. I'm not going to say symptoms, just behavior, and which many of them are just like normal behavior in a child, like developmental behavior, as we call it, and how sometimes we tried medication to almost kind of knock that down and to almost make like a perfect machine, as if that was the perfect thing or for our kids, right? And I don't know, I've been quite against that, and I think the management has to be very holistic and has to involve the child, the families, the schools, and it's a combination of everything, right? It's not just medication.
No. Yeah. So yeah, what kind of, like, in terms of school refusal, they're saying, since the pandemic, the rate of EBSA, emotional based school avoidance, is just massively ramped up. Did you see that as well? You're still seeing that, like, a lot of ADHDs that come to you, and with autism, are struggling to go to school, attend school?
Yeah, well, most of them have anxiety. I mean, if not refusal, if not active refusal, they struggle. They struggle a lot. So this is one of the changes I feel this has happened since in the last 20 years, that previously kids were more kind of ADHD, purely ADHD symptoms, while now is these kids are bringing a lot of anxiety. Right. And also, yes, obviously the fact that schools and the academic pressure is so high, that is contributing to this anxiety as well. Yeah, absolutely. But since the pandemic, all the anxiety / depression or emotional symptoms have increased so much, I think. Yeah.
And what about, I guess you probably see as well, eating disorders, body dysmorphia. Do you see a lot of that as well in this profile?
Yeah, what we see is a complex mix of everything, basically. So we see, as you say, kids with school refusal, kids with body dysmorphia, and self-harm. We see a lot of self-harm, suicidal ideation, mood dysregulation as well. But yeah, for instance, the school refusal, I've just like before joining the meeting, I was just like checking on my email, and one of the emails that I received from the private clinic was a dad asking for a second opinion in relation to his daughter, who was apparently, she was assessed for ADHD and didn't score or didn't qualify for the diagnosis. And but apparently, like, really, really anxious about school, refusing to go to school, sitting at home, trying to do some homeschooling. And so that, by the sound of the email, he sounded desperate to have a correct diagnosis, right? And yes, all these type of things that I think we didn't see that much 20 years ago, and how everything has gone a little bit bad and a little bit too extreme.
It's like Lenny was saying about social media, because obviously that's another huge change you will have seen. What, in terms of the impact on these young people with ADHD, autism, what have you seen since the advent of social media?
Well, this is so social media is impacting in young people so much. And I think just not only people with ADHD or autistic spectrum disorder in general, to all the young people, to the point of some of them live their lives through social media instead of just like having normal contact. And then, so I would be curious to see what is the outcome of that. I think we probably going to have to in my mind, I also put my scientist lens on it, and I would like to see if there's any type of a study or anything showing what type of consequences is having for our kids, right? And I think it probably has lots of consequences, not just so also in terms of attentional levels have probably dropped since then, but also at an emotional level. Yeah, absolutely. And how much impact and how also in the rates of ADHD and autistic spectrum disorder.
Yeah, a lot of people do say that is it things like social media that has caused this increase in ADHD, you know, and like everything being so much quicker, you know, emails, is it causing it? What do you say to parents that ask about that?
Well, I think that has probably contributed a lot, okay? But in my mind, you know, I could talk about this for hours, because, you know, in my mind is far more complex. It's just like there are a number of factors that are affecting or interacting. One is obviously the use of social media, as we're discussing here. I think our style of life is also contributing a lot. How we constantly kind of almost like working so much, sometimes not paying a lot of, or not staying with our kids as much as we should, when kids ultimately they need our attention. I mean, not just ADHD kids, but all the kids.
Yeah.
And that is contributing as well. And as I said earlier, like schools like the impact of the high pressure that schools are imposing or posing in our kids. Yeah, so the parenting style, so not just like the time that we spend with our kids, but also the parenting style. So there are a number of factors that I think are contributing to that for sure.
There's a lot, isn't there? There's a question here. Someone would like you to talk about ADHD meltdowns and coping with them. So yeah, I mean, obviously very common, that emotional dysregulation. What's interesting is what with the DSM-5, isn't in the European kind of diagnostic, they take into account emotional side of, you know, of emotional regulation, dysregulation. DSM-5 doesn't take into account any of that yet. Do you think that they will start, you know, the next version of the DSM will actually have that criteria? What do you think?
Well, you know what? I have some of my colleagues in research who are like the members of the DSM panel, like DSM-4, DSM-5, DSM-6. So some of them are just purely like, they're not clinicians, they're just purely researchers. They haven't seen a child or many kids with ADHD in their lives. And then one of my colleagues, Canadian colleague, Rosemary Tannock, she said in one of the meetings, she said, well, this is happening because in the committee we don't have any member, or many members are females. So another problem with the DSM-5 panelists is that many of them are male. We don't have many females, and I think that has an effect on how they select the criteria for ADHD as well. And yeah, so I hope that they're going to take many of these factors into account. But having said that, sometimes what they see or what they do as experts doesn't really reflect on what we see in the clinic, and sometimes it's because of the lack of clinical experience, if you want. Okay.
Yeah. Which is a problem, obviously, because it's the gateway to support, you know, that diagnosis.
Exactly.
It really should reflect actual experience.
Yeah. And I've seen myself in that situation several times, where I've seen someone and I said, listen, according to the DSM-5, I can't diagnose you with ADHD, but I do think you have ADHD. Sorry, I said, I think your daughter has ADHD. So these things have to be assessment and treatment and management has to be carefully done by people who have been in the field for many years.
Yeah, because not all psychiatrists, obviously, their knowledge of ADHD, because it's so nuanced, it's not the same. It's not equal.
If you go through the criteria, you tick, 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 and sometimes it's not as easy as that. And especially nowadays, like with all these changes, it's not as simple as tick, tick, tick. Okay. And then in relation to the meltdowns that they were asking, so what I would recommend, okay. So one of my interests as a psychiatrist in working in ADHD has been psychoeducation for parents and for teachers. So I've run psychoeducation groups, multiple psychoeducation groups with parents and with teachers, because I think, as you were saying earlier, one of the things is to get to know what's going on with the kids, okay? And sometimes it's with themselves. So some of the parents would recognize their own symptoms when they attend the psychoeducation sessions. And what I would suggest is that there's not, when running the psychoeducation, some of the parents would find their own way of coping with things such as meltdowns and some of the problems, okay? But I think the most important thing is to get to know your child. Each child is totally different. So, and as a mother, I can tell you that, you know, what is applicable to my child might not be applicable to your child, and then try to impose like a rule or to say, this will work. Sometimes it's like you need to know the generic approach, which is like, as Alexia was saying earlier, try not to confront the child, try to not to say no, try to manage in a more positive way in parenting. That is going to work better. But still, sometimes is the importance of knowing your child. Okay, and if you don't know, some parents, sadly, they don't know their child because they don't spend time with them, and so it's important to spend time with the child. It's important, I think, to speak to your child. Yeah. And I see this when that I see that some parents, I think, sadly, they don't kind of have a proper chat and a proper conversation with the kids. And I think it's so important. My 3-year-old child, I've been having conversations with him since he was 1.5. He used to sit down with me and he used to say, let's talk about things in his own language, right? And now his language obviously is much more developed, but when he was 1.5, and we were talking about things, and we were talking about what happened in the park and this and that. And I think this type of dialogue that you need to have with your kids has to start from the beginning, and then you have to communicate with your kids, and that's the way you get to know them. That's the way you can help them, and you can build up the relationship with them.
It's hard though, isn't it? I mean, ideally, yes, of course, we should. But sometimes, as you would know, parents with ADHD, particularly if there are other things going on themselves, you know, some parents have autism as well and trigger really badly with noise. So if their child, you know, is kicking off, like there's just no, you know, it just triggers this response in the parent, and then they're having a meltdown. Someone else asked here actually, yeah, what about ADHD meltdowns in adults? And quite often a child meltdown will trigger the adult meltdown, and it never goes well when those two then added together. The fire just like goes out of control.
Absolutely. Yeah. So one thing is the theory. The other thing is how you apply the theory to the day-to-day basis.
Yeah.
And I understand that, and you know, when I was running the psychoeducation groups, one of the comments of the families, because they didn't know my personal background, was like, "Yeah, Dr. Farrin, she knows a lot. She's very knowledgeable, but she doesn't know about what living with a child with ADHD is." And then the next psychoeducation group, I said, "Well, you know what? I have family members with ADHD, and I've lived with a person with ADHD." So I can tell you, not just from my professional background, but also from my personal experience, what ADHD is and means in the day-to-day life. And I'm sure that, you know, but I think we can't feel responsible for what we do wrong, but at least we need to know what we should do. And yes. if the child has a meltdown, we need to know that we can't have a meltdown as adults, because that is going to make things 200% worse. So it's, as adults, we need to understand that, but then it's true that we are human beings, and we are not perfect at all.
Yeah, and particularly if there is that, because again, with the ADHD, autism, that window of tolerance, for parents, if their tolerance is like that, the child very quickly kind of reaches that limit for them. And yeah, what do you kind of suggest for parents that, have, that difficulty because of their brain wiring in terms of regulating themselves? How, what do you tell those parents? How do you help them?
One of the things I keep saying to just my ADHD kids and adolescents, but also this would be applicable to parents as well, is the importance of, for instance, eating. And one of the things I'm really kind of advocate is the importance of exercising. Is really important. So I would say for parents, try to look after yourself. I think the importance of having a social network, if you can. I know how difficult it is when you have a child with ADHD, okay? But trying to maintain that as much as possible, and trying to maintain a healthy style of living and exercising. Exercising is so positive to help regulate your mood and to reduce meltdowns. So try to look after yourself, and then parents do need a lot of coaching themselves, and try to take advantage and try to use one expert to help you, so that you can help your child. Sometimes it might be both of you needing it, right? Like the adult and the child.
Yeah.
And, and again, you as an adult, we have to, as an adult, you need to understand that you have to look after yourself, otherwise you won't be able to look after your child.
And that's the other problem though, isn't it, too, with us parents with ADHD, is self-care is something that usually gets sacrificed for everything. There's no time for self-care because you've got to meet your child's needs, you've got to meet your work, requirements, and we always put that on the back burner, to obviously our detriment and our children's detriment, because then we can't hold the space because we're at capacity. And that's why, as you said, it is so important. So what do you advise parents with ADHD that don't, put themselves first and create that space? What do you see works for them in order to do that?
I think parents with ADHD, parents with kids with ADHD, who might or might not have ADHD themselves, but let's assume that there's a possibility that they're going to have ADHD themselves. So their lives are going to be more difficult because their kids are not as easygoing, let's say, as many other kids, and so it's going to bring family crisis and family difficulties within the family environment. Difficulties with the schools, difficulties with. So what I would say is try to make things as simple as possible. So for instance, if you can liaise with the school and try to be open with them and try to say, I think sometimes the school can be very supportive. Hopefully, I mean, some of them aren't, but they should all be supportive, and try to make things as easy as possible, because I think life is quite challenging for those families. So try to make things as simple as possible, and try to communicate with friends, communicate with people who know, because sometimes friends might not know and they might give you the wrong advice. They might say, oh, you should be doing this, you should be, but they don't really know because they've never had a child with ADHD. So some other friends might be more understanding, or they might have their own problems, and they can give you So I think charities and network of parents with the same problem could be helpful and supportive, so that you don't feel you are a bad parent. So you're not, because that's most terrible thing that you feel like I'm doing this wrong, or I think that's the most terrible feeling that a parent can have.
And all the ADHD parents have that feeling, like, speaking personally, and Eleni as well, I'm sure. And then all the parents that we coach, that narrative, is strong. The guilt and shame starts, as Alexia was saying, the negative messaging we get as ADHD, children from word go. Then you become a parent, and even more negative messaging. And it's, and then the evidence that we keep building without support, we just kind of keep confirming that negative messaging. I am failing at this. And the guilt and shame just mounts.
Yeah.
And can often turn into depression. Have you seen that as well? A lot of parents with ADHD untreated, you see a lot of depression.
Absolutely. Yeah. And sometimes it's because the criticism they have received from others, because sometimes others don't even know about what is going on. They don't even know about how challenging their lives can be. And sometimes they receive these comments on this critical, I don't know, comments and words from others that are totally not making things any easier. Okay, but sorry, I was going to also say, so I think, in terms of parents, I think also the fact that some of them have realized that they have ADHD themselves, and they have understood their lives and what they've been through, I think is positive, because they know that ultimately the child can succeed in life. Because I think another negative or another negative thought that parents might have is, my child is not going to be happy, right? And I think as parents, we are kind of concerned, is my child going to be happy in the future? Is my child going to, I don't know, to finish the studies? And I can tell you that I've been working on this for, as I said, many years. Some of the people I treated back in 20 years ago, they have contacted me. They found me on internet somewhere, and they have contacted me saying, I am this person who you treated 20 years ago. And they told me about their lives, and most of them, I mean, they're happy, and they're doing really, really good. So I think as parents, we also need to know that the kids with ADHD can be as happy and as successful than anyone else. Okay.
Definitely. I
So
mean, that's Eleni, please.
If I may, I'm so happy to hear you say that, Dr. Farrin. And much of that, I think, also falls to us as parents to recognize what will make our child happy is often not maybe what we might not align with what we begin thinking. So if you want your kid to play the violin, but they want to play the flute, it can be as simple as sort of reflecting on what it is that we're thinking, and as you said, how that sort of translates to our kids.
Yeah, absolutely. Because I think this is one of the worries. That the main two worries is that the criticism received, and whether or not you're doing well with your child as a parent, and then the other is what is going to happen with my child? Is my child going to be happy? Yes, is my child going to be, I don't know, an adult who's never going to succeed in their life? And I think it's worth knowing that none of these two cases, especially when parents are involved, okay, because I've seen a massive difference. Okay, all of the all of the people attending here are parents who have, first of all, who are aware of the child's condition. They are hands-on and they're doing things. And on a Wednesday evening, they're attending this. It's because they are well kind of involved and doing as much as possible. Okay. So, and what I can tell you is I've seen a massive difference between those parents and those who really don't care. Okay. Because sadly, there are people who don't care. Okay. And then the difference is huge. So the difference is like 0 to 10, basically. Okay. So my message here is that, because I think parents attending the group today and the summit today are those who are really involved and who are knowledgeable and who are I'm sure 90% of these kids are going to do really well because is the outcome, okay? And sadly, I wish I could say this for the rest of the parents, because sometimes, but sadly, some parents don't care, okay? And this is something that happens to us in the NHS, that sometimes, some parents who come to us, they don't really have the capacity of...
Yeah, capacity.
Mm,
Yeah, that's the other thing. I think, there'd be parents, they care, but sometimes they just...
sorry. Yeah. Sorry. Maybe my wording is like, maybe, yeah.
It must get frustrating though. The frustration probably. We've faced that too. Remember, Eleni, we were trying to, because we're like, same thing with you. We really understand that the parents have a huge impact on whether the child will succeed with ADHD, huge. And so we've got like a parent education program as well online. We tried to run, parent training, and we just couldn't get the interest. We couldn't, we're thinking, hang on, but why are parents not more interested? Because they have such a huge role in helping their child. Eleni, did you want to say something on this?
What we've seen too, Stephanie, is these changes take time, as Dr. Farrin said as well. I mean, we can, suggest ways on how to, shift an approach or to offer positivity, but we also know that consistency is key, and consistency from both parents as well, because often we've seen some parents are not aligned. Maybe there's one parent who doesn't accept that diagnosis or is in kind of denial around that their child might be neurodiverse with whatever conditions they've been diagnosed with. So that too can add to the the atmosphere at home, which can sometimes not always be supportive or positive as we would like to think. And it certainly contributes over time. But I do believe with our parent education and group parenting, we all, I would venture to say, are experiencing some degree of challenge to get things to sort of shift our mindset and our child's behavior ultimately. But we do offer that support, and we do offer that opportunity to do so.
Yeah, it's not easy. It's that interdependence that Dr. Hallowell keeps pushing. That should be the goal, not trying to do it yourself. But again, I guess a lot of parents, because of guilt and shame, they don't want other people to see, so they don't let them in. So they don't get the help that they need because of the shame. Have you seen that a lot, Dr. Farrin? Do you obviously encourage parents to lean in to support?
Yeah, so what you see is like a broad kind of a spectrum of parents. So from this kind of very end of a spectrum of parents who don't care. So we have some of them, few, but some of them. So those who care but don't have the capacity, or they understand that sometimes the system or the medication or someone else is going to do the work for them. Therefore, they don't take the full responsibility of parenting the child, okay? And then you have all the parents who really care, they're more involved, but they don't have the time, because so you need to understand where everyone comes from, okay? And then you have the parents who are really involved, they do have the time. So you have like you have the whole spectrum, okay? So I think, the idea is for them to get to know and then to accept the diagnosis, to accept the child and to accept the difficulties, rather than trying to change things. Yes, you can change things, of course, and this is our lives are about changing things and improving. But there are other things that you can't really change, and it's not, and you have to accept. Simple as that.
Again, and that's again that importance of adjusting expectations through what we call, the ADHD lens. And that's why the co-education is so important.
Absolutely. And therefore, for instance, the coaching can work well for that, because it's going to acknowledge the strengths and it's going to take advantage of the strengths. And sometimes it's about being humble and understand our difficulties, because we all have difficulties. And our limits, and it's about understanding, well, you know what, I can't do this. So if I can't do this, what can I do? Who can help me? Or I don't know. So none of us can do everything. So it's about getting to know ourselves.
Yeah, and that's exactly what we do in coaching. There was a question here around how important do you think trauma is a crucial factor affecting the possible misidentification of ADHD? Trauma and ADHD.
Trauma and ADHD. Well, this is a very interesting topic. Okay,
Mm-hmm.
and you know what? It's interesting because trauma, when assessing a child for ADHD, one of the things that we clinicians need to rule out is the trauma. Why? Because the impact of trauma in the brain, especially in the child's brain, can cause symptoms to mimic ADHD so much. Like, for instance, like a child can be very fidgety, can be very inattentive. Why? And the reason is because the trauma is affecting the frontal lobe as ADHD is affecting. Okay, so it's kind of mimicking a little bit the ADHD, but instead of being a developmental reason behind that, the reason is the trauma. Okay, but it works kind of the same because you're going to have the same kind of effects in the child. And then interestingly, I've had patients who have suffered from very, very early trauma because of their parents at very, very early age. And then they have been diagnosed with ADHD, okay, and they've been put on medication for ADHD, and then medication for ADHD has worked. So whether or not, so I'm still a bit mixed about this. But the importance, the trauma is going to affect the brain in the same area, so many very similar areas, and then sometimes it's really difficult to differentiate. And funny enough, as I said, what we've seen in the clinic is some of the kids being on medication for ADHD, and they do well. So it's interesting. Yeah, but if you probably know Dr Maite, and he's a strong advocate of ADHD as a result of trauma and as a result of kind of almost a brain damage, and trauma in all types of form. Trauma from childhood, trauma from the family, and how that has an impact on the brain and on the brain development and on the frontal lobe. So I don't know if I've answered this, but the answer is not simple with trauma.
No. Yeah. What we've seen, and I guess again, because of ADHD being highly genetic and the parents having ADHD, and we know that with ADHD there's some bad consequences like drug addiction, being an alcoholic, conflict, infidelity, a lot of marriage breakdowns. There's always going to be a lot of this type of thing in ADHD families, and so quite often the child, there might be ADHD inherited genetically, if that's the thing, but there's also trauma because, the parents have got ADHD. So I'm actually yet to coach. I'm not a medical professional, obviously, but I'm yet to coach an ADHD, that doesn't have some kind of trauma. I know that sounds awful.
Exactly. Yeah. And trauma, and then Matthew is saying ADHD is nature and nurture, and I fully agree with that. Some of my colleagues in research, they don't believe in that. Okay, I have to say, they're much more into the genetic type of mode. Okay, and they would say, well, this is not ADHD, it's not a developmental disorder. Okay, but I agree with you, Steph, and interesting, we all have had traumas. Okay, but sometimes why I feel sometimes people with ADHD might have more difficulties to deal with the trauma, or the trauma is impacting much more. They are more sensitive. They are more. So I'm not saying it's anything wrong with them, okay? But for whatever the reason, sometimes like small traumas in someone who is neurodiverse has a bigger impact than the same trauma or the same situation in someone who is not neurodiverse, okay? And that is adding into the symptoms and into the picture. And then you end up having a history of traumas, and then the person's having difficulties to cope with all of them, of course. Yeah,
it is. It's really tough. But you said that with the ADHD medication, though, even if it is just for the trauma, sometimes the medication helps with that trauma, like some of the.
Yeah, well, the ADHD medication is sometimes is quite interesting, okay? Because the ADHD medication has been used in other psychiatric conditions, including depression, okay? And including, like, for instance, I have kids who have had a brain trauma, like a brain, traumatic brain injury, as we call it. And they end up being medicated with medication for ADHD as a result. And then medication for ADHD is kind of effective for them, okay, to manage some of the symptoms. And of course, it's not ADHD as such, but again, is nature and nurture. And these kids have developed ADHD symptoms as a result of the impact on their brains when they had the accident at the age of 3 or 5, and they've developed these ADHD symptoms. You can argue, have they developed these symptoms because their brain was predisposed? You would never know, okay? Because some of them, they didn't even have the age of, you couldn't compare before and after because but maybe they were predisposed to ADHD, and just the impact of the trauma has caused ADHD. But yes, the medication, and then you end up using medication for ADHD for other ADHD-like behaviors.
Yeah, so I guess there's a lot of, as a psychiatrist, is that testing and measuring, sometimes process of elimination because of the co-occurring conditions. Like, have you found sometimes, because like we said, the girls, it's difficult sometimes to get them diagnosed. They mask, for instance, the ADOS, the test for autism, like my daughters, they kind of didn't get first off, they just didn't reach the threshold. So do you see a lot of that as well? Like just.
And for criteria and for assessment for both, I mean, I hope the next decent criteria are going to reflect differences. They have to somehow split between boys and girls and try to create like a specific type of symptoms for girls. They can't just like say it's the same. It's not the same. And then when assessing, is absolutely, that's the case. Girls are different. And then sometimes it's tricky. Sometimes it's tricky, and they might have. So for instance, one of the girls I recently diagnosed with ADHD, she lives in Ireland, and her mom had gone to 2 different assessors in the United States and in Ireland, who both said, no, your child doesn't have ADHD. And then she came and I diagnosed her with ADHD. She's doing really well with medication. But mom, when we finished the assessment, she was crying. She had been desperately trying to go through this with the negative of different professionals because the girl didn't fit the criteria.
Yeah. Do you find that, because with the settings, it's got to be at least 2 or 3, isn't it, that you've got to see it? And because they mask at school in particular, because, they're so they mask, but then they come home and then, the parent absolutely gets it. And it's horrible for everyone and the siblings. And then, the same parent goes to the school, tries to, get the school to help get them the diagnosis, but the school comes back with that questionnaire, like saying this child's like perfect. They're like, oh my God.
Yeah. Not to mention if the girl, and sometimes boys as well, have good IQ or high IQ.
Oh, yes.
And then that's even more difficult, because then they're not going to see any difficulty. So sometimes they don't even need to sit down for 20 minutes because they can immediately grasp everything, and then school is going to say yes, everything's okay. So
and in the meantime, what do you see happens? Because I guess you'd see girls that didn't get diagnosed, but then a few years later, what do you see happen to them? Because they
exactly. So that's the consequence of not being diagnosed. because then you are told, no, you don't have that. And it's what I was telling earlier, like the other day, like swooping in tears, like mum and daughter, like saying, well, we've been told no. And then, you know, they were like quite, I'm telling you, they felt like nobody was listening to them. And then they were feeling like, so what's wrong with me? So you're telling me I'm not ADHD, and so why is this happening to me? So this has very negative consequences, obviously.
Massively, massively. So do you find as well that the girls, what other kind of consequences? So girls that fly under the radar because, you know, they're people pleasing, they, you know, IQ, so they get missed. What do you see the consequences, you know, from a mental health perspective? But yeah, what happens if they don't get
So most of them sadly are going to develop depression, anxiety, self-harm. So this type of other symptoms that are not obviously not purely ADHD, but yeah, as a result, they're going to, many of them would even develop a type of personality, which is borderline personality. And sometimes they diagnose with borderline personality, and they did have ADHD.
Yeah, what are the differences? The borderline, you can't be diagnosed with borderline personality, can you, at a certain young age, or is that how the ADHD and BPD?
Yeah, so what I've seen is many some psychiatrists diagnosing borderline personality disorder traits in girls, okay, who had other type of, and basically, I don't really like borderline personality disorder. If you read the criteria, it's exactly, it can be anything, including ADHD. Oh. And many of them had ADHD because they say like it's mood dysregulation, impulsivity. So if you read the criteria for borderline personality disorder, if you have ADHD, you're going to say, well, that's me, because I have this. But and so many professionals, they don't really, or they go quite straightforward to diagnose someone with emerging personality disorder. And even if you can't diagnose someone until the age of 18, they're going to say, well, emerging. And that's kind of risky because then you're giving like a name to your disorder, which is not the case. There's something else, and then you've been diagnosed with borderline personality disorder. Is very risky.
Different medication for BPD. They seem like different.
Yeah, well, we don't have medication for borderline personality disorder. Plus, in terms of the connotation of borderline personality disorder in health professionals, we know that is a lifetime disorder that you're going to kind of almost is going to mark your life, and there's no treatment for that. Basically, it's kind of like a very negative connotation when you've been given this diagnosis. Okay. When reality is it might not be as negative, of course, but then also it can be something else, and it's not as simple as borderline personality disorder. Okay,
it's tricky, isn't it? Like, yeah. Do you use these? I know in the US they've got these like brain scanning. You know, some psychiatrists use those kind of diagnostic tools like brain scans. And what do you think about those things?
Yeah, well, we don't do brain scans for diagnosing. Now, quite recently, well, the last few years, we do the QB check, which is something that has been recognized by NICE guidelines, or is the only kind of approach that's been kind of recognized by NICE guidelines to be helpful. Is basically, it was a test that we used 20 years ago in the past when we, it's a test that is called Go No Go, okay? And it's measuring your ability to inhibit your response, okay? And also your focusing and all that. And so these tests, it was we used to do studies with people with ADHD and using this test and neuroimaging. So it's been like a lot of research around this. But then and we found that this is kind of one of the best tests to differentiate between people who have ADHD and those who don't. Okay, but that doesn't mean that everyone is going to have it, or those who are having ADHD, all of them are going to not to pass the test. So the test is a bit tricky, if you want, because some people might rely on the test, and they might say, well, my QB test is negative, therefore I don't have ADHD, and that is not the case. We don't have. So it has to be interpreted with a lot of caution. We can't be as quick as to say, yes, this is your diagnosis. It's not like that.
Yeah, unfortunately, there are some psychiatrists that may just use, like I know there have been some psychiatrists that just use that test, never even talk to the child. And actually the child has got ADHD, but because the way the test is delivered, like again, you know, some ADHDs are brilliant.
Yeah.
Brain switch on. I got this. I could, you know, they're amazing. And
it's a snapshot of the child, and it can be absolutely fine or mixed. Some results can be mixed. Yeah,
it's tricky, isn't it? So I guess just kind of finishing off, what tips would you give to parents wanting to get, you know, a real diagnosis, an accurate diagnosis for their child? How can they find a psychiatrist that they can be confident, you know, really gets it, understands ADHD, uses those right approaches to do a comprehensive analysis, you know, or how can they?
Yeah, I don't know. I think sometimes it's word of the mouth. If you've heard someone who's like, and can tell you, you know, and then so many of the patients I have is because someone has talked to them. Sometimes it's about, you know, if you Google and you try to see what is the psychiatrist's background, and then I would hope that the psychiatrist has worked in ADHD for several years. Okay, it's not like there are psychiatrists who are just started doing ADHD, and so I would hope that you can do some research trying to find out, I don't know, like how many years has this person worked in ADHD? What type of, you know, if they have done some research or not, or what is the, you know, other aspects that can be very helpful, okay? So that you know that it's not a person who has just started diagnosing or assessing someone with ADHD. Because as this is like a new kind of, is quite fashionable right now. So some psychiatrists maybe have just started. I don't know. Yeah.
So ask questions, word of mouth, obviously. And, you know, we've got our list of referral partners as well on our website as well. So that can be helpful. We know that they know what they're talking about. So again, that word of mouth, people that have.
Yeah, because ultimately I wouldn't advise someone to go somewhere unless I really know. So if someone asks me, oh, I need I don't know, like educational psychologist to do this assessment, do you know someone? So if I know someone, then I would say, well, I've worked with this particular person in the past, and I think you can trust him or her. It's a little bit like this.
Yeah, no, that's good. Yeah, thank you so much, Dr. Farrin, because obviously, as we know, the demand for psychiatrists and the wait lists for diagnosis are huge, and you've taken the time to speak with us today. So we really appreciate it. So we'll have this recording available. So a lot of the people will be able to watch this that didn't attend today. So we'll get your wise words out there. And any last kind of final advice, you know, for parents that might be feeling a bit hopeless about it all, just as a psychiatrist, what would you advise? Just last.
Yeah. So I just want to say that I'm so sorry I couldn't answer all these comments on the chat, because, you know, it's about the overlap between borderline personality disorder and complex PTSD. I've done research in complex PTSD myself as well. Okay, so I know what they're talking about. So sorry I couldn't answer these comments, because I think they're very, very valuable. So my message for the parents is for them to know that, you know, as I say, I think they need to be reassured that what they do is the right thing. So how to say, there's not like a right or wrong in our lives or the way we parent our children. And sometimes we do things that are not the right thing, okay? And then sometimes we do mistakes, and we realize, and it's like, oh, you know, I did this, and this was not the right. That's fine. It's absolutely fine. That is not going to mark your child, okay? That is not going to have an impact on your child. It's absolutely fine. Even I, as a psychiatrist, I do things that are not right. And then it's even worse for me, because it's like, oh, in my head, it's like, oh, I shouldn't have done this, I shouldn't have done that. But, you know, it's absolutely fine. It's just like the most important thing is the fact that, you know, that what you're providing in general, what you generally do, and it's not about you know, it's not about judging you in one particular moment. It's about the work that you do most of the times, and the longitudinal kind of work and effort that you put in your child. So don't worry about making mistakes. Don't worry about doing things wrong. Things can be corrected, things can be shaped. And we are all, this is a learning curve for all of us, even for me, okay, as psychiatrists. So yeah, I would say well done, and keep going. Being parents, I would say being parents is the most challenging and difficult thing that can be done. I keep saying it's more difficult than medicine. It's more difficult than medicine, it's more difficult than psychiatry. And what, sorry?
Law.
Yeah. I can tell you, it's more difficult than any other thing. So, I mean, for those parents who find it easy, it's like, you know, I don't know, because I find it really, really challenging. And then if you on top of that have a child who's a little bit like different, and it's even more challenging because of the things we've said. Okay, so just keep going and enjoy your kids, which is the most important thing.
So true. Thank you so much, Dr. Farrin. Very wise words.